Thank you to Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring this video.
The latest poverty report from Robinhood and its partner Columbia University shows 1 in 4 living in New York City are experiencing poverty. That's nearly double the national rate. And the prices at the grocery store, well, they're
1 in every 4 New Yorkers, that's over 2 million people, doomed, trapped in a downward financial spiral that may never end. In spite of the fact that New York only elects self-proclaimed progressives and socialists who've been promising to fix our problems for years, while the cost of living here just seems to climb higher and higher. And that can only mean that 25% of this city's population lives in poverty on purpose.
Food carts are chained to a fence to hold the patrons' places at a pop-up food pantry, a sign of the times.
Costs in New York City have increased 131%, while median earnings went up just 71%. Now half of all New Yorkers are struggling.
I lost my job, and HRA wasn't giving me enough food stamps, so sometimes at the end of the month I wouldn't have enough.
We used to service roughly around 200 families. We're now servicing on one single day, we're serving close to 400, if not above 400 families.
We have been wasting taxpayers' money for far too long.
$6.4 billion is how much New York City has spent on the migrant crisis in the past 2 years. And Mayor Eric Adams says he is furious.
We could have spent $600 million on 2,000 guidance counselors and social workers in schools.
Half of New Yorkers told us that they are having to go into debt in order to purchase food for their families. This is not just impacting financial health, but physical and mental health.
So as New York City falls apart, its apartment prices keep climbing as people fight over the few available homes that are left. And what nobody running this place wants to admit is that this proves progressive policies are nothing but a disaster for middle-class residents who can't find homes during a housing crisis caused by our leaders refusing to pass laws that allow modern buildings higher than 4 stories in rich neighborhoods, forcing people to part with eye-watering amounts of rent for very little in return, which just makes it harder for people to shop in our grocery stores, not because Key Foods is greedy, but because their prices reflect the reality of doing business in a place that's gone full progressive. Don't ever go full progressive. It fails every single time it's tried because progressive policies result in the opposite of progress. Taxing businesses to the brink while allowing crime to run rampant in our stores, forcing prices to rise faster than inflation, which results in people experiencing the opposite of financial independence, with many consumers now going into debt just to pay their rent and put food on the table, turning what should be the American dream into a never-ending cycle of wage slavery that leads to misery and spells financial doom for people who in many cases are tough overachievers, yet have their lives robbed from underneath their feet by backwards policies. Which brings us to the real reason 2 million New Yorkers now live in poverty. Nobody can out-earn a system that's deliberately designed to steal as much of their money as possible and spend it on things that don't benefit them or their families. Like the billions funneled to companies who make bank off New York City's self-sustaining asylum crisis, supplying everything from hotel rooms to clothing and medical care for an unlimited number of travelers from all across the globe, creating a tough situation for many New Yorkers who need help but feel they aren't getting it. And as you're about to see, the way many New Yorkers live with this expensive new reality just wouldn't make sense anywhere else in America. There's a light in here, but I don't know if we need it. This place is sunny and it's quiet and I like it. It's just $4,400 a month for a 1-bedroom, which, believe it or not, is really affordable for lower Manhattan where we are. In fact, I think this is the cheapest 1-bedroom you can get, which also has a full-size washer and dryer. But although this might save you money, most New Yorkers are losing money on a weekly basis when they do things like buy food at the grocery store. And part of the reason for that is that they're already paying too much in rent.
People are actually going into debt and suffering real physical and mental health effects because of the monetary strain. 86% of us see and feel it. The cost of buying food and feeding our families going up, and it's rising faster than our wages.
So last month, average rents in Manhattan hit a new record at $4,500 per month, which is $100 higher than the previous average rent record here, which was set back in 2023. And if rents are rising and grocery prices are rising, something's gonna break. And with household budgets imploding, it's no wonder that 53% of people have reported taking on more debt just to feed themselves. And the problem here is that even though rents might be expensive, they only change on a 1 or 2 year basis. But if the prices of the stuff that you'd put in your medicine cabinet or put in your refrigerator, if that stuff suddenly goes through the roof, people, they're gonna have a decision to make. Do they keep themselves fed, or do they take on credit card debt, hopefully only on a short-term basis to get through the next couple of weeks, the next couple of months? Hopefully it's not longer than that, but it has been for many families. And for that reason, many families just can't take it. They're choosing to call it quits. And both New York State and New York City are losing more residents than they're gaining on an annual basis. And the people who haven't left yet are wondering why more of the city's money isn't going to things that would actually help New Yorkers, like food assistance programs or grants to companies that would build new buildings, increasing the supply of apartments, which would lower rents and help people do things like buy groceries at the grocery store. So that's got many people asking, where does all of New York City's money go?
We have been wasting taxpayers' money for far too long.
$6.4 billion is how much New York City has spent on the migrant crisis in the past 2 years. And Mayor Eric Adams says he is furious.
We could have spent $600 million on 2,000 guiding counselors and social workers in schools. They hurt the future of New York City.
Okay, that's a lot of money, and it's hard to argue that had it not been used for other purposes, like grants to developers who could build new buildings, that New Yorkers today wouldn't be facing a very different situation when they look inside their refrigerators. And when you consider that housing costs are the biggest cost anybody has who doesn't already have a free place to stay, lower rents would solve most of the problems New Yorkers are facing. Because with rents being the largest fixed expense most people have, everything else a household spends has to revolve around that number. But with the asylum crisis, New York City found itself in a no-win situation because our laws mandate that anybody who needs a temporary place to stay get one. And since our laws also mandate that we are a sanctuary city, those laws apply to anyone who finds themselves here, creating a legal catch-22 where no matter who the mayor of New York City was at the time, they would be forced to oversee these policies. But even though there are many people who have serious issues with that viewpoint and say that the mayor could have stepped in and changed how things were handled here, you've got to agree with one thing, which is that the way New York City went about handling the asylum crisis probably caused a little bit of extra inflation. Because if you remember, New York City had programs like their debit card program, which gave families who were in the asylum shelters $1,400 a month to buy groceries. And even though this program apparently saved New York City a whole bunch of money, the issue with it is that if you've got people who live near a grocery store and they can't afford the groceries, but then new people come into that area and they can automatically afford the groceries, the store doesn't have to lower prices or get more efficient in order to keep serving its customers. It can just let its prices rise because people are still paying and the store is still making money. They've still got customers. And with most asylum shelters being placed in New York's least affluent areas, this was certainly not a rich person's problem. And even though not every single family in New York was able to get a prepaid debit card, if you've got folks who don't have to pay $4,000 a month rent, they've automatically got more disposable income, which they can then put back into local businesses like a grocery store.
Food carts are chained to a fence to hold the patrons' places at a pop-up food pantry, a sign of the times. At one of the New York Common Pantry locations, manager Omar Alvarez gives out many basic food items, including produce and shelf-stable milk, because some of the people have no refrigerators. He tells us the need has...
So you've got people living in apartments in this city who pay thousands of dollars a month, but they don't even have refrigerators to keep their food cold. And between their rent and the high prices at the grocery stores, many people find themselves at food pantries for the very first time in their entire lives. And whether you agree with the asylum crisis, how it's been handled or not, one thing's for sure: appropriate steps have not been taken to make sure more of New Yorkers' money stays in their pockets. And while the solutions to the money problems faced by many residents are so simple and so obvious, the most ridiculous aspect of all of this is that even though we're in a progressive city where everyone elected claims to be fighting for the little guy, nobody running this place actually wants to see the little guy get ahead by himself, being able to pay his own rent, put food on his own table without government assistance. Because as you're about to see, this city is rigged in favor of rich progressives, and they're doing everything they can to keep it that way. Most people don't know this, but if you're seriously hurt, that accident could be worth millions of dollars. And if you're injured in any way, you need to know how to protect your rights. Which is why you might want to know about today's video sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest personal injury law firm, who doesn't just settle for lowball offers. In fact, over the last few months, they've seen record judgments, like a $12 million judgment in the state of Florida that was 34 times higher than whatever insurance was offering. Add to that $26 million judgments and $6.8 million judgments in Philly and New York, and it should be pretty clear that Morgan & Morgan is not your typical law firm, because they win a lot. Plus, it takes just minutes to see if you've got a case, and you can do it all from your phone. Step 1, submit your claim online. Step 2, Morgan & Morgan's experts get to work investigating. And step number 3, Morgan & Morgan only gets paid if you win, which is what you want. And they can do this because they've got over 100 nationwide offices and over 1,000 local lawyers who are ready to fight to get you the best results possible. You can start your claim with Morgan & Morgan by following this link right here, which will also be in the description of this video. And remember, there's no fee unless they win. Once again, thank you to Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring this video. So here we are in a very nice, very charming, very affluent neighborhood in Lower Manhattan. And even though it's very quaint, it is a perfect example of why New York City has a housing crisis and why that's never gonna change.
Controversial development is moving forward in Windsor Terrace. The move will bring affordable housing, but will also bring high-rises that many longtime residents say they just don't want.
So there's your problem. New housing developments in neighborhoods like this are controversial because what they threaten to do is to lower the value of all the property you see around here that is stuck in the past. And for that reason, residents who live in old buildings like this want to force all new construction to look exactly like what you see here. This modern building right here is actually a fantastic example of how zoning works. As you can see, it is the same size and height as the old historic buildings that flank it on either side. And what forcing buildings to conform like this does is it restricts the number of people who could live somewhere. You'll always have a certain number of units in this space and no more ever. And that's how neighbors that live around here in places like this, super rich people, want things to stay. But it gets even worse because you see this tiny little garden right here. Well, this place, which looks like a storage unit for Burning Man style artwork, it was gonna be turned into housing for the homeless. Until the people who live around here came out in force against that plan. They would rather have lattes in this little park right here than have their fellow New Yorkers with roofs over their heads.
It raises median rents in the neighborhood considerably, and that will lead to renter displacement.
The way that those affordability rates are currently calculated, when you're talking about 60% AMI, that's unaffordable to 50% of New Yorkers.
So we got two arguments here, both of which are used to disguise the true reason nobody wants new apartments, which is that they are bad for the retirement plans of people who've already spent millions to live in an exclusive part of town. And the first argument is that new apartments will raise median rents, but that's not an argument at all, because median rents aren't the rents anybody pays. They're just the middle value between the most expensive apartments in a neighborhood and the cheapest apartments in a neighborhood. And this proposed development in Windsor Terrace that is supposed to go on an unused plot of land, kind of like this garden, it's going to contain 40% affordable apartments. However, in order for the owners of that building to make money on it, they're going to have some really expensive apartments there to offset the lower discounted rents they're offering, which might raise a median rent number nobody pays, but it'll do it while adding tons of affordable apartments to that neighborhood, which is going to bring down the rents of all of the other places that are nearby. But what about the second argument, which is that these apartments, they're not really affordable at all because half the people that live in New York City couldn't afford to live there, so why build anything?
When you're talking about 60% AMI, that's unaffordable to 50% of New Yorkers.
Critics of the
So this term, area median income, it means that families who make 60% of the area's median income have to be able to afford these apartments, the ones that would go in an empty, unused plot of land like this garden behind me. And even though the person on the news might be correct, perhaps these apartments will be too expensive for 50% of New Yorkers to live in. But the people living there will still have to be 40% poorer than he is. And this would do a great deal towards lowering the overall cost of living in that very neighborhood, while being a good business decision for the property developer.
Higher food prices, rising rents, and lower wages is forcing many Bronx residents to stand on lines to get donated food for the first time in their lives.
You know, it's so backwards that we've got people in wealthy neighborhoods protesting the creation of apartments that would get people out of those food pantries. And this is in a city that claims to be progressive and compassionate. So we're doing everything we can to keep people standing in line at a food pantry instead of letting them benefit their own lives by keeping more money in their pockets. And right now we're watching the wealthy cling to the sanctity of their exclusive neighborhoods, even when giving that up would really benefit their fellow man. And what that means is that as nice and charming as a neighborhood with tiny little buildings might look, it is the reason many New Yorkers are living in poverty. What do you think about that? Should New York build homes for New Yorkers who don't have them? Or is the status quo we have worth maintaining to a point where we've got lines of people chaining up their carts at food pantries before they open? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.